In 1890, this facility was built. It was the reform era of the prison system, and it was believed that you should be able to reform prisoners and teach them, and then be able to let them out in public after their sentence was completed. And we are actually in the sheriff's residence at the time. The area we're in would have been the kitchen, and across in front of me would have been the dining area. All the food had to be prepared here for the prisoners, and then it would have been taken and put onto trays, and it would have actually been taken to each floor of the 3 floors that are here and slid through these passageways. This goes back into the holding facility, and then from that other side, a deputy would pick it up and take it to the cell where it belonged. They could learn reading and writing. The industrial age is taking place. We have a great workforce needed out there, and to rehab a prisoner was the ideal situation. When the facility was first built, it was made to have like 1 prisoner per cell, and you could work with them. They were safe, they were in their own cell. And then as time went on, more and more prisoners were housed, to sometimes 2 to 3 per cell. And near the last of the use of this building, when it was almost 100 years old, the residents have moved out. The upper bedrooms were used for work release prisoners, and the facility was basically turned into a big office building. It was actually set aside after the prisoners were moved out and a new jail was built, and then after about 10 years money was raised to refurbish it, and now we can use it as a tour. The commissioners have some offices in here, and we can see what life was like in a jail around the turn of the century. So as we move through, this would have been the kitchen. We are now back into more of the holding area. Central booking would have come in through this way. Central booking would have come in through this door across in front of me. The booking and dispatch hall would have been. They would have figured out which cell they needed to go to, and then they would have taken them either on 1, 2, or 3 of the floors. As we look up these stairways, the other 2 jail holding areas are above us. Floor number 1 and floor number 2 are identical to each other, each holding the same number of cells. When we get up on the 3rd floor, there are actually 6 big holding cells. We do know that in early times it wasn't used much because that was more designed for women prisoners, but as overcrowding became more and more of a problem, then it was actually used to hold prisoners in. Interestingly, when this building was built, you can see it had really low handrails on it, kind of typical for the time in the 1890s, but moving prisoners up and down was kind of dangerous, so these extensions were put on so that they couldn't easily flip over and fall down through this through 3 floors all the way to the bottom. So a lot of times one of the people really notice when they come in, there's a beautiful woodwork around, and this is a really good example of it. This actually is butternut. Butternut, sometimes it's called white walnut, and then
bleeding. Were you here for that one? Yeah, it was bleeding.
These boards would have been heated up with some moisture, and then a stamping press would have actually pressed this pattern into them. You see it a lot in the big Victorian houses around town here. Butternut was real common for a while. Not many butternut trees left, blight problems, just like a lot of other old-time trees. This first area we walk into, we commonly call the catwalk. This is where the deputies would have spent their time walking around and taking care of prisoners. A deputy could go over. We looked at the food pass-throughs. You can see back here behind this picture is what is the inside of the pass-through. The tray could be picked up there, and a deputy would have taken it and gone around the outside of the catwalk and actually slid the tray into the prisoner. There you go, Joe, there's dinner for you. During the construction of this, there weren't the really heavy windows and stuff like in modern homes, and it would get very cold back here. We didn't have a common modern heating system like we did. So in the winter, it would get cold, and prisoners had to have extra blankets. Same as summer would come, and it would be very, very hot. And prisoners, they would bring in coolers with ice so that they could actually put rags in them and put them around their necks to help keep themselves cool. They said in bad snowstorms, that snow would actually blow in around cracks around the windows, and deputies in a storm may have to shovel some snow out of the catwalk. This area is commonly known as the day area. So during the day, the cells could be open. If prisoners weren't causing any trouble, they could come out here. There would have been some tables and some chairs to sit at. If you were giving them trouble, though, you could have been put in your cell, and this door could have been locked. This would have closed you off from the general population. If you continued to cause problems, then a heavier door could be closed and secured. Now you have no interaction with other prisoners, but yet the deputies walking the outside catwalks could still see in and see what you were doing. When you look in a cell, it's hard to believe that you had two people in that close proximity. Like I said, when this was first built, it was designed to hold one prisoner. Then we see two, and then we know in later days, sometimes if an overcrowding situation, a mattress could be put on the floor so we get a third person in there. On the first and second floor, all the cells are controlled the same way. There's a lever that goes to each cell. By pulling or moving this lever, I can unlock the cell door. So I could have a prisoner step in, I could lock his door. I could open it up when he was allowed to come out. And we could control each door individually. Obviously, these have froze up over the years, and actually even in later years of when the building was still used as a jail, actually padlocks were put on the doors. Not real safe if there would have been a fire, but it was one way to keep everybody protected. Okay, at the time when this was being used as a jail, there would have been a door here to separate it out. We're now walking back into the living quarters. This large office here was actually, it would have been the living room. And of course the big elaborate entrance as you came in with the big open stairway. And there's even pictures of brides coming down here, getting ready to head over to one of the local churches to be married. And it's a really neat to think that families lived everyday life here while the whole prison system is set up right behind you. And they raised their children here, they had happy times of Christmas here, but yet right behind these walls were the prisoners. And if you were a prisoner and you had a court case, one thing that would happen is they could handcuff you and shackle you and take you over the most secure way, and that would be this way. So we're now in the basement of the jail. Actually, when you look back through history, this is the 5th building that was used as a jail in the county. Initially, prisoners were housed in people's homes, and then there was some warehouses down along the river that were used for jails, and then over on lot number 9, which is on the hillside kind of behind the Fremont Elks, was a jail there, and then the jail that is in the courthouse, in the basement of that we commonly call the dungeon, and then a very large jail, big 4-cell jail behind the courthouse, and then this building. So there were quite a few different buildings used. So down here, this would have been a very functional spot at one time. In the early days, there would have been the laundry set up and stuff down here, and work release prisoners could help do laundry. Of course, in more modern times, laundry was sent out to facilities to be done. So a lot of times we talk about the Tanny Hill story when we're down here. This is a really unique story that took place in the county. A young man by the name of Samuel Tanny Hill had committed quite a bit of crime, originally from the Marion area, but he ends up in Sandusky County one night, and about 2 in the morning he goes into a little teeny diner called The Hut on State Street. And he goes in there and he robs the place at gunpoint, and he takes the waitress that was working there, Shirley Bradford, hostage, and he decides, I will take her out in the country and I'll let her go. By the time she gets back to town, I'll be long gone. Well, they head out south of Fremont along the river till they get to about to Tyndall Bridge. He's going to claim that she went after his gun, so he took a tire iron and he beat her and threw her over the bridge. Her body was found down by the river the next day. They were looking for Tanny Hill and couldn't find him, and finally they find out that he was arrested out in the state of Kansas, and he's brought back here to serve time. Actually, while he's here, he actually breaks jail and wrecks a couple cars and is caught and brought back and locked up again, and then he is found guilty of murder, and he's sentenced down to the state penitentiary in Columbus, where he actually stays down there for a couple years until the electric chair, he gets put on the electric chair, Old Sparky. So this is the passageway down to the tunnel. The tunnel serves a couple purposes. One, it was a great way to run the steam lines from one building to the other. The big boilers in the courthouse could help heat the sheriff's residence and the jail. And then also at one time all the cables went through here from the old telephone systems and stuff. But one nice thing was it was a really safe way to bring prisoners over. You could have them handcuffed and shackled, you're not going outside at all, they're still in a secure area. As we walk through here, one thing to remember is we pass between the jail behind us, and as we head to the courthouse, this area above us would have been the typical spot where the gallows would have been set up. There were 3 hangings in the county, and they would have been in the gallows yards above us. So we're now in the basement of the courthouse. This addition was put on in the 1960s. The original parts of the courthouse are on the north wing. And as we go up these 3 stairs, we'll be in the 1870s addition. And then, of course, before that, when the courthouse was built, would have been 1840. And that's the front part of the hallway ahead of us. Interestingly enough, this is the second oldest courthouse in the state that's still in use. Medina is older than ours and still being used. And then, of course, we have ours here. So we're going to take a walk up back into time. As we walk back into the older part of the building, it's an interesting story that a gentleman by the name of Thompson had been arrested, and we know a little bit about him. We don't know a lot about other residents, but Thompson actually was arrested for murder and was housed over in the jail on Lot 9. He broke out of there. Actually, it was a wooden jail, and he kind of dug his way out, and he escaped, and he ended up in the little town of Woodville. And then he was caught, and he was brought back again. Then the second time he escaped, he made it all the way to Illinois, and they caught and they brought him back there from there. And this building was under construction at the time. It's early in the 1840s. The upper floors aren't finished yet, but we do know he became the first resident in the jail. It's kind of interesting to find out. We found out more about him in the fact that he was housed here for several months, locked in one of these cells we're going to see, and then finally was taken out to be hanged. The report from the doctor was before the hanging, they came in and checked him out. He was very pale and was malnutritious and stuff, and you're going to see why in a second. So as we step up these stairs, we actually head back into time, what it would have looked like in a dungeon in the 1840s. Notice the extremely low archways and the massive stone walls. As we look down these corridors, there's 2 of them in here. We're actually in the north corridor or the north cell of cell blocks. And this would have been only lit with kerosene lanterns at the time, so we would have had that smell of the kerosene burning. We also, it's enclosed and it's kind of damp and dank down here, and the cells all would have had just a bucket to use as a restroom, and so that is going to be collected periodically, but otherwise for a while it's just kind of open. People have no showers down here, so you had a lot of sweat, and life in these jail cells was just miserable. If you were locked up, and you could be locked up, you could be a man, a woman, or child. This was the only facility we had to hold people in. So you would have been brought in and put in a cell very much like this one. I'm going to step in here. See, we have a nice cot to be comfortable in. We have a bedpan to use. There's even, this person was lucky enough to have a small light put in here, but most people didn't have any light at all, or they were just given a candle. Sometimes as you look at the ceilings, you can actually see burn marks from the candles where people could burn their initials in. It's very creepy in these tight little areas, especially when you think that most of the people were housed here and you were sitting in the dark. You were given 1 meal a day. It was a meal basically of bread and salt pork, and that was to take care of you for that day. Now, there were a couple interesting things that could take place. If you were still on good terms with your family, they could bring you 1 meal a day. So you could have a nice meal brought from home. They could also bring you in a candle, let you use it, and they would allow you to light that candle. And so you had some light in here then. But other than that, you were pretty much locked up in here. If you were giving them a lot of trouble and you weren't the most ideal prisoner, they would hand you your blanket and they would take you down to this in cell in this corridor. This is solitary confinement. I'm going to step back in here and you're going to see there is not much room. It resembles more of a long hallway. You know, I'm pretty much almost touching wall to wall here, and you would stay here until they decided you could go out and be in a larger room. This is actually all constructed out of limestone. It's called Asher construction, and you can see the little chisel marks in the blocks as you look at them, and they stack perfectly on top of each other. Limestone floor, limestone walls, and a limestone ceiling. All this came from a quarry just out on the west side of Fremont. Facility was only used for a short time. Locking people up in the dark is not a good idea. And so after about 10 years, the facility was built behind here that had 4 large open holding cells so prisoners could all be put in one cell together. So you'd have 4 different locations. We're going to wander back into modern times and head out of here. Always watch your head. They're really low archways. So he went by the name of Handsome Jack Radford. And he was pretty well known through the community. He was like a carpenter builder guy, but sounds like he was in bars a lot and stuff. Maybe a womanizer. It's interesting because in the 1830s, newspapers covered everything real elaborately. And at the time, Fremont would have had several different newspapers. The story of this wasn't just covered in our local papers. There was also a paper in New York City that picked it up and one in St. Louis that picked it up because it was so graphic. So he finds out that his wife is possibly filed for divorce, and they have 2 small daughters. They live in Bellevue, and so he hops the train and comes here to the courthouse to confirm that she has filed, and she filed not only for divorce but also custody of the 2 minor children, which would be really weird in the 1880s. I mean, they normally would not award custody to a female at the time, different era that we lived in. And but he had always warned her if she ever tried that, he warned her what would happen. He states that. I warned her what could happen. And so he is so mad, and like I said, he's been known to be pretty rough. He jumps a freight train headed back east. So he goes headed back to Bellevue, and he jumps off the train on the street that he lived on. Well, up the street from his house were the Greenslades, and those were his in-laws. He goes to his house and he picks out a revolver, and he starts heading up to the Greenslade house. Mrs. Green, so his wife, Mrs. Radford's there with the 2 daughters and her mom. Mr. Greenslade wasn't around, and they see him coming up the street, so they get scared. And they lock the door, and they go into hiding in the house. Well, he beats on the door for a while, and he can't get in, so he kicks the door down. He finds his wife cowering under a bed on the 2nd floor. He grabs her by her hair and drags her down the stairs out into the kitchen, where he kicks open the back kitchen door and throws her out into the yard behind, pulls up the revolver. The first shot, he hits her in her wrist. The second shot, he walks completely up to her and shoots her in the head. They said the scene was just terrible. Here's the 2 little girls watching, the mom watching right in front of everybody. He does it. He leaves. And on his way back, they said on Route 20, headed east, he stops at a farmer's house and he asks for a glass of cold water. And he tells the farmer, it's a good thing old man Greenslade wasn't there, or I'd have killed him too. That's the only time he mentions that, because when they arrest him in a short time after that, and he claims it was all self-defense. The Mrs. Greenslade came after him with a steel garden rake and was beating on him, and he shot to just try to protect himself, and he didn't mean to kill his wife. It was all just self-defense, and he sticks by that. And you can see the trial was a relatively short time. He's arrested in November and then hanged by the following October. So when the spring and the trial's ready to take place, he actually doesn't want to, he's like, I don't need to do anything. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm innocent. I didn't kill her. And he just sticks by this. And the trial actually didn't last that many days because there's just like no evidence. I mean, he admitted to the deputy or to the farmer, and so they said they took him and they locked him back up, and he would have been in the big 4-cell jail behind this building. And he's locked in there, and they actually let his daughters come in a day or 2 before the hanging. And they said, I think the oldest one was 9, and they said she cried the whole time when she was in the cell with him. And when she left, she said, bye, Papa. And they said the little one just didn't say anything. And then the night before the hanging, they said it was real quiet. They said the jail was unusually quiet, like prisoners were just really, really quiet. And he had his buddy that he knew, or somebody in there he knew, sang him his favorite song, the Cumberland Gap. And they sang it during the night several times and stuff. They ask if he wants to see any clergyman or anything, and he refuses the night before and the next morning. He refuses. He doesn't need to see anybody. He didn't do anything wrong. And then when it's time, right before the hanging, his last meal, he had 2 glasses of red wine. The gallows would have been erected in a gallows yard with a stockade kind of built around it. Certain people were allowed to come in and see the hanging. Most people were outside. They said the town was packed with people. People came in from all over because this big hanging, it had been covered so well in the papers. He's brought out with a man on each side of him, He's actually, they said, shackled with extra leg weights added. They walk him up here and they get him turned around and they're ready to put the noose and the black bag over his head. Sheriff Pullman standing back by that back lever back there along the back, and the deputy on each side. He looks over the crowd and he sees his father-in-law in the crowd, Mr. Greenslade, and he goes berserk. They said just filthy vulgarities come out of his mouth, and he just screams and hollers, and he's shaken. They can't control him up there, so they finally have to remove Mr. Greenslade from the audience. They get him out, and it's interesting. He calms down immediately, and he apologizes for his outbreak. He doesn't apologize for the murder or anything, but he apologizes and says, "I'm really sorry, I should have behaved better than that." And they put the bag over his head and noose around his neck, and when that lever slid over back there, then these rocker arms on the side pop out, floor splits, drops. It was a clean hanging. They took him down, put him in a wooden box, and put him in the front of the courthouse for 3 days so people could see what happens if you kill somebody in Sandusky County.